Hello everybody, this is episode 2 of my Hellsing Ultimate Dissection, where I'm talking about what else but Hellsing Ultimate episode 2. Namely the OVA episode 2. This episode premiered in August of 2006, June 2007 for the English version, and like I said, we're beyond the introduction, so now we're getting into the nitty-gritty of the story, although we're still just barely introducing our real enemy. Like I said, the first enemy introduced in episode 1 was namely Alexander Anderson, who is in fact a very formidable enemy for the Hellsing organization. However, he is still just one thing compared to a whole nother organization they're just barely learning about, who we will come to know as Millennium, although we'll learn the true origins of who they really are and where they actually come from. But that being said, the basic synopsis of this episode would be that while having a meeting with the higher-ups of the Round Table being an organization who protects Britain from all kinds of threat, Hellsing just protects Britain from the supernatural. Integra's a meeting with the Round Table, namely that we know of who are important, Sir Penwood and Sir Hugh Irons, two people who her father knew. She's in a meeting with them discussing this new vampire threat and saying how it must be from an organized force, not just a random occurrence. And then right in the middle of this, they are attacked by the Valentine Brothers, Luke and Jan Valentine, who then proceed to just fuck Hellsing in the ass, basically. Killing all the soldiers there and turning them into zombie soldiers for them, or as this show calls them, ghouls. And then from there, it leads to a confrontation where basically everyone has to fight Walter, Ceres, Integra, Alucard, of course, fighting against the Valentine Brothers, and it leads to a bloodbath of epic proportions before the show is even, 3 episodes in. Episode 2, it's a splatterfest, and it's just awesome. We see a lot. We also learn the beginnings of a lot, and we see glimpses of a lot of things. So now that I covered the basic plot, I should dig into a lot of the highlights of this episode. Highlight number 1, which the episode starts off with, we see a bit of Alucard's past. Namely, we see the great-great-great-great-grandfather, I guess in this sake, ancestor of Integra Hellsing, Abraham Hellsing, defeating Alucard, and we see him getting beaten, and then he tells him that he's been sentenced to death. However, as we clearly see, he was not sentenced to death, he was sentenced to serve the Hellsing family for the rest of his existence. And at first, this is still a great scene. We see Alucard before he was an anti-hero, at the very least. But as the series progresses, we see just how much he can take. The question of how Abraham Van Helsing beat Alucard definitely comes to mind, and there are so many theories surrounding this. Because as the series progresses, we see that Alucard is, in fact, a monster. We see him recover from getting shot to pieces, we see him getting burned, we see him fighting opponents who are much physically stronger, sometimes even supposedly faster than him. We see him cut to pieces, bisected, stabbed through the head, cut in billions of fucking pieces, thrown through buildings. See all this stuff, we wonder, how did this ordinary man, because the whole theme of the story, well, one of the many themes, but the one, preached by Alucard himself, is that it takes a man to beat a monster, and only a man can dare hope to. So it's clear that Abraham was not a super regenerator like Anderson. He was not a vampire, he was not a werewolf, he was simply a normal man who knew about the nature of magic and the supernatural, and yet he bested this, this unholy creature of incomprehensible power. A lot of fans have said that, Alucard was not as powerful back then as he is now, and saying that, the Hellsing organization themselves made him the way he is. And I believe that to a certain extent, although it begs a lot of questions as to how they did that. And still, it begs another question, just how powerful was he then? Because after he initially became a vampire way back in the day, hundreds of years before, 1800s, he was uncontested in the land of Europe for many centuries. No one tried to stop him. And maybe that's why he admires the Hellsing family so much, that they were the ones who finally put his reign of terror to an end and turned him into a servant. It's kind of ironic, this great, powerful force is in fact a servant for a family who's stronger than him, but still, all the same, Hellsing is now a driving force for good, but Alucard is the main, he's the tip of the spear, basically, who drives home every mission and gets it done. So that's very interesting. Also, another important factor, I love how they do this in a comedic scene where Walter has replaced Ceres's bed with a coffin. They note the fact that to be a true vampire, she'll have to sleep in the coffin to, keep up her strength because she's refusing to drink blood. This brings us a very important notice of drinking blood for vampire, obviously, but the importance of vampire nature in this show, because you can't just be a vampire. There's different levels of being a vampire. As we come to know, there will be artificial vampires who are man-made. There will be fledgling vampires who were bitten by another vampire and turned into one. However, they are still not yet a true vampire. They do not become a true vampire until they've tasted blood that they have taken for themselves. And that is, it can be offered up to them, or they can steal it. And as is known later on, way down the line, episode 7, whether it's given or taken can be quite a different experience and lead to very different power levels among the vampires, so to speak. So right now, Ceres is still in her, walking days or crawling days of being a vampire, so she's formidable, but not quite the peak she could be, and we see that happen later on, but it's important to note that they made this distinction right now. And also just a funny scene between her and Walter. Also noted by Walter, this is the episode where Alucard is given the Jackal, his newest gun, because the castle, his previous gun, which is useful against many opponents that we saw, killing many vampires with it, however, it has no effect on a regenerator like Anderson, who recovered easily from the rounds of the castle. This new gun, it's basically a scene like I said, in Blade or Batman or Hellboy, where the person who makes weapons for the guy, the main hero, tells him, it does all this stuff. The bullets have been blessed, and they have, pure Macedonian silver. All this stuff to basically tell you the weapon is super powerful. It can get the job done, and as Alucard says, it can even stop someone like Anderson in their tracks, which means he won't be able to generate from the bullets. The damage that's done is permanent. It's basically one of the most powerful weapons in this series that we will see. And we see its first use, really, in this episode, but it's also introduction, so hence the title, Meet the Jackal. It's an awesome weapon. It sees a lot of use before it finally meets its own end in the series, as everything pretty much does. With that said, and then we meet the very short-lived Valentine Brothers. These are two artificial vampires who, as we learn, who were made for the sole purpose of killing Hellsing. And when we first see them, we get two very different sides. Jan Valentine is a dark-skinned vampire who from what it looks like to me, is wearing a tracksuit. And he, like I say, he's dark-skinned, he's foul-mouthed, arrogant prick. It's the funniest lines of almost any character in the whole freaking OVA. Just always cursing up a storm, just being one hell of a riot. It's just hilarious. And yeah, that's basically his role in the story. And then he gets bested by basically everybody, Walter, Ceres, the Round Table organization. And then there's Luke Valentine, who's calm, collected, wears all white suit and jacket, blonde. He too, though, just like his brother, is arrogant, although not quite as charismatic or fearless for that matter. And he meets his end at Alucard alone, in quite a gruesome manner. So let's chat this up, shall we? First we see, to be quite clear, these enemies are very powerful. We see both of them tearing apart normal human soldiers incredibly easily. It's almost sad the way the Hellsing troops are just cut down bit by bit. It's brutal, grotesque, and quite namely, of course, for this show, entertaining. I mean, Christ, so many dead, so fast, and such a brutal manner. It's just, whoa. That being said, Jan Valentine was the first to meet his end, I believe, and he kills a lot of people, and then, of course, though, he meets his end first through